This week we're gonna do something special. I have a recording of a conversation I had with a student, someone who has been reading my blogs and listening to my podcast for a while. He subscribed to my email list, booked a free coaching call, which you can also do, by the way. And this was the result. And I think this is a good one for the podcast, seeing that this conversation had sort of a question-answer structure. And the good thing is, it is quite long. So we'll have part 1 now and part 2 next week. I hope you'll enjoy this podcast. If you want to join my email list and get yourself also one of these free coaching calls, go to www.yourbeststory.net. Yourbeststory.net. Enjoy! I was really excited about this call, especially because you sent so many questions already.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks so much for taking your time, Niels. I really appreciate it.
Let's just first do the questions.
Can I say as the preamble, so that I've been organizing my thoughts, and then I've been doing that, and I was kind of happy, but then I came across your suggestion of creating an ID track, and it took me a little bit to think, how is that different? But I listened to it again, and then I became more discontent with how I organized it. But it's good. I think it's, I've tried, so I'm still a little bit busy with it, but try to get more the track, so it becomes more an ongoing story with building in a bit of tension, and that's been really helpful. So I'm not quite there, but nearly there, I would say, in terms of the organization. But I've used your ID track setup. It's been
the difference between normally outlining and an idea track. Well, actually, a good outline has an idea track behind it. But it is very helpful to think of it as a sequence of ideas and not so much as section.
Yeah.
That being said, it is important to demarcate the thesis and the topics for chapters. That the chapters do have a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Of course.
Because otherwise it becomes one long story only with a few heads in and you want to, as much as possible, defend one idea, if that is that kind of work, at least.
Yeah.
One idea per chapter or per book or so.
Yeah, absolutely. It just, I feel it helped me link it a little bit more, so it's, so you got a hook at the end of your thoughts, and then you start with that in the next one. So it's a bit more coherent, I guess.
I think that will really help processing fluency. If the ideas are internally well connected, it really helps the reader understand what you're talking about. Because separate statements, basically, you're asking quite a lot of the reader himself, to connect all these ideas. So if you have that really logically flowing in an idea track, that's really helpful. So maybe some of the questions have by now been answered, but I have them here on my second screen, so I'll. So you said you're doing a lot of teaching at your ministry center. The teaching style is very informal. You don't want to go too far with the informality because you're afraid of losing credibility. First off, you also say that later that you're not entirely certain who your audience is going to be, and that is really important for this question. You are teaching at this ministry center, right?
Yeah. So at that center, and then we got various centers. So sometimes you go to other places, and sometimes speaking at church, that kind of thing. And like I said, I found for what we do, which is sort of helping people and restoration and respite and healing, it works very well to be very, like, the threshold as low as possible. People come very nervous, very hurting. So we try not to make it a lecture so much, even though hopefully it's theologically sound, but we just share more stories and share from our own experiences. And people really connect to that. Like, I found that that works well. I think, well, but how does that translate into writing, where you can't look people in the eyes, so to speak, and they don't know who you are? And
you sort of need to develop literary eyes you can look with, basically. First of all, your audience is very important, because what resonates with them is what should be resonating in the book. That needs to connect. So it's good to look at what kind of people seem to be most engaged with the teachings that you provide. Are those young people or people of all ages? What is, you can maybe glean some information from the kind of people who who are listening to you and the kind of people who actually come to you afterwards to ask questions. There is probably some common denominator there. I would be careful with trying too hard to emulate the voice of the youth, for example. I don't know what your age is, but you don't look like a 16, you don't look like a 16-year-old. So don't behave like one. That is that is really cringeworthy for many people. And for the teenagers themselves. I mean, they are that they think this old guy in their from their point of view is playing a teenager. That's just creepy, So it's important to be careful to be overly informal such a way that it comes across as though you are imitating youth. And it has much to do with the formal register, avoiding slang, for example. You can use simple words, you can use powerful words, the short and snappy words, but avoid slang, because the slang is very easily becoming cringy. A word about this credibility, it's that also depends on your audience, because if you write a book, for the academics, then you have to use another kind of register, because then you have to also stuff it with footnotes and whatever, because that is the expectation. They expect the book to have a certain format, a certain formal register, a certain way of supporting your thesis, etc. But for your audience, I don't have the impression that is at all the case. So they want to actually, the average person is just as much looking for an experience as for information. And if you give them an experience, then they have also more ease processing the information. So there needs to be a good balance, of course. It needs to be solid information. But if you make that more engaging, if you make that easier to process, and you write it in such a way that it creates an emotion in your reader, etc., then I don't think your credibility will be at stake at all. I think it will help your credibility because they have this experience and because they understand better what you're doing. So if you steer away from using overly formal language, but you try to speak their emotional language, basically, not so much their words, but their emotional language, then you have this connection. And if people have this connection, this experience of connection with another person, they will give that person more credibility. Actually, research has been done as to whether high formal register or a very low formal register translates more in respect for a certain academic or not. So what they did is they had the exact same paragraph, one with extremely complicated language, and actually it was the original, I think. And they rewrote it in the simplest language that they could come up with. And in general, the results were that the students way higher esteem for the writer of the simple text, because somehow they all agreed that person was smarter. This was one of the A/B tests. So it's very interesting, because actually the words were dumb, you could say. It was dumbed down. But still, their appreciation and the credibility of the writer went up. So I don't think you have to worry too much about dumbing it down too much. I think the only thing you have to worry about is not to use language that would scare anybody away.
No, that's helpful. I did actually, since being in touch, I read that book you suggested, one of those books. Can't think of what it's called now, but it's like 8 things that fire up people's brains or something like that. And it touches into that. It was interesting. One. That's the one, Writing for Impact.
This is indeed one of those books that.
It was good. Interesting. So I finished it last week, so it sort of speaks into it a little bit.
Right. So that must have answered a few questions already, also as to how to make it boring. The most important thing for you was that it would not be boring.
It is. I mean,
and if you manage to fire off these simulations in the brains of your readers, then it won't be boring. Of course, first of all, you need to have something to say, and I think that is something that this guy is not pointing out clearly.
Sure.
You can write anything. You can write complete nonsense. it will still not and use all this stuff perfectly. But if it doesn't mean anything, it will not do anything.
Yeah, style over substance.
What?
Style over substance.
Yeah, exactly. And I think in the end, what you want your readers to remember is your idea and not so much how you put it. So first know what to say. If you have very clear what you want to say, then you can start employing these methods.
Yeah.
And I think from your experience with teaching, you will have an idea of what the kind of stuff is that people find engaging. You can see in your audience when are people basically walking away or falling asleep or whatever, and when are they at the tip of their chairs?
There's a saying I heard. It's called stay above the iPhone line. If you get too boring, people start checking their iPhone. That's the bad news.
Line. Yeah, I like that one. Yeah. Well, that is in writing even more difficult, because when you are lecturing on the stage, then at least you are basically a film, and so you can sit back and passively, you can let just come over you, and reading by definition demands more of an effort, and that is also really a sickness of our time, that through feeds, social media feeds, we are so used to very short messages without very much substance. That as soon as we want to read a book, teenagers of nowadays have difficulties reading more than 2 or 3 pages in a book. That is, I don't know if that counts for every teenager, but you hear the complaint everywhere. And professors at universities are complaining that their university students in literature, don't manage to read through an entire book anymore. Now, that is, and I think it really is because of how used we have gotten to technology and how it gives us instant pleasure, instant gratification.
Sure. Yeah.
And everything is short, everything is snappy. Nothing needs really your brain anymore, and that is really a big problem of this time. And I have no idea. Oh yeah, you talked about the iPhone line. The iPhone line is way higher, I think, or lower, depends on how you look at it, for books, because it is true that reading a book demands more attention, demands more effort. And nowadays people have very little patience for that, and that is I think it's painful to see that,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I understand. It's hard to know what to do about that. But I have a friend who just published his own book last year. It was actually decent. But his belief is that it's best to have a book and stay under 200 pages if you want it to be attractive enough for people to actually start it, and for it to be published. So is that something you'd agree with?
Yes and no. If you ended your sentence with "if you want it to be published," this question always brings up another question. And what do you want? What do you want to achieve? Do you want your book to be successful, or do you want to record your thoughts? Do you want to leave a legacy or something like that? Really, your purpose with it is very important. If you want indeed traditional publishing, then definitely you're probably going to have to stay under those, under 200, I don't know, but 350 pages is a lot then, But maybe you're looking for something completely different. Maybe you have done endless decades of Bible studies and you rather want to make some sort of a overview of everything you know. Well, then you are okay, and you cannot access the traditional publishing. It's going to be a completely different animal then. So what you want, what your purposes is, what your audience, who your audience is, that is very important. But if you want your book to end in bookshops and so, then probably it's good advice to stay under 200, 300 pages. That being said, by the way, it's another thing that's important to mention. Most of the books that are being sold, research has shown, are not even really being read. That ties into the problem that we just spoke about. But only the research shows that on average, only the first 25 pages are read and the rest is just never seen, basically.
Really? Gosh.
there was some percentage with that, like 67% of the population that of the control group or something like that did this, and well, you know how it goes. I forgot the numbers, but a staggering number of readers start a book enthusiastically and put it down by page 25 and never think of it again. So it is nowadays often recommended to front load your book a bit more. For example, if you include an introduction, that you sort of write down your conclusions at the beginning and as well as at the end, basically. A deductive approach. If you first explain what you're going to explain, then at least you have this core message also for the people who are not going to manage to get through the entire book. Because it is now clear that for many people it is rather a sort of an attention handicap, basically, then that they're not willing to read it. They do want to have the message, but they just don't have the brain capacity anymore for some reason, well, for probably that reason, to actually get through the entire book. Well, that is, of course, something they can train. So I would still say make it as engaging as possible. Yeah. Maybe your book will be the first one that that turns it around. But definitely try to put your core message at the beginning as well. So that's
okay.
Even those who will not manage to get to the end will have something to work on.
Yeah.
And actually, you can build tension also by first mentioning your conclusion and sort of leave them in the dark still about how you get to that conclusion, So this you asked a question also somewhere about how to create maximum suspense. Well, in nonfiction, that is a bit more difficult, of course, in exposition. But you have the 5 W's, 1 H. Do you know what it is?
No.
That is the what, who, when, where, and why.
Sure.
5, and then 1 is the 1 H is how. If you keep the readers in the dark about one of these, and it is relevant enough, they're going to want to know the answer, like why was that, how was that, when was that, where was that, etc. So leave some question open. So if you share your conclusion, you said that you discovered that this and this and that, you can try to word that in such a way that people are still going to be curious as to how you got to these conclusions. What were these experiences that got you there,
Yeah.
So that the reader can already absorb the lesson, and the how of it, and the when, and the why, and the where, and whatever. Well, those you can explain later, and you hope then that the readers will be curious enough after reading your introduction.
Yeah. Okay, that is helpful. Yeah. You give them enough to be hungry for more, and rather than just, it's a bit more than just leaving breadcrumbs, isn't it? It's having a little chunk at the beginning,
Yeah.
And hopefully,
it's a fine balance. I think it is more dangerous to overdo it with the tension than to do not enough of it. Because if you don't give enough basis for curiosity, then it's like that on the page. So you need to be strategic with what you are giving them and what you're not giving them. And because the message that you want to convey is the most important, this is not this book is not being written for suspense, but suspense is just a good vehicle for your message. I think it's better to stay on the safe side and give them really enough to understand where you're going, and then give a few hints as to how you got to that conclusion. Especially if there are personal life stories that got you to this conclusion, then you can raise the curiosity about what did God do in your life, and how did God bring this on your path? Those kind of things.
Sure.
Especially the how question is useful then.
Yeah. Okay, that's brilliant. Can we? Is a very specific question about lengthy, wordy sentences.
Wait a second. I had
because I know I probably need to change a bit, but I'm reticent to change just because I really enjoy, even when I read, when people use long, complex sentences, I enjoy it when it's well done. But my feeling is that maybe that's not something I'm ready for, so to speak.
Well, you can learn everything. It's I think we have gone overboard with this stuff. I mean, what started with good advice by William Zinsser, by C.S. Lewis, by Hemingway, is then taken to such extreme as if there is nothing else, you know.
Right.
Whereas if you look at William Zinsser, I have him on the desk here.
Okay.
He said always go for the simplest word. Always go rather for short sentences than for long ones, but use the long ones once. Well, you know, he really talks about a balance, but he really wants to. He emphasizes the simplicity, you know, always go for simplicity. Yet if you read this book, you don't have to look long before you find a long sentence with a complicated structure. What was simple in his eyes in the 70s is complicated in our eyes right now. And I have here this I've been looking a few things up for this. Well, actually I have here The Allegory of Love by C.S. Lewis, and I'm in luck because I have 3 parts now. Somehow fell apart. But basically every sentence that you read in this book is more complicated than the average sentence in any book right now.
Yeah.
You know, so whereas both these authors were urging their readers to look for the clearest word, the word that best and easiest, simplest conveys what you mean, you know. But then there's a Hemingway. Okay, I'm not going to my bookshelf now. And he pushes this extremely far. And he does a really good job. It reads easily, but it is Hemingway, right? It is Ernest Hemingway and nobody else. That is his style. That is his voice. But now everybody is talking about him as though his style is the only good style, you know?
Right. Yeah.
And that is a mistake. I mean, William Zinsser is one of the best writers ever, you know, and C.S. Lewis, of course, also. And actually, most of the good writers that I have here, especially from the 20th century, you know, before everybody went completely overboard, it is easy to read. It is easy to understand. But the sentences are long and the sentences are complicated. Why is it easy to understand? Because they are clutter-free. And I think that is where really a misunderstanding happens, that people think that you need to make everything short, everything snappy, everything as terse as it possibly can be. Whereas what the masters, the writing masters of the previous centuries spoke out against clutter. Make sure that every word counts. Make sure that everything connects well. You know, that the grammar is okay. And the problem is that if you create long sentences, also the chances of forgetting a comma or forgetting a word or having a word, having something not connect well, those chances just increase dramatically if you use longer sentences. So you need to also be aware of that when you use a longer sentence, that you have to check that if you have a compound subject or so, that you then also use a plural verb to go with it, even if there's a big plier construction in the middle, you know. And also the use of signal words, that it is always clear through coordinate conjunctions or any kind of conjunction what the place of a certain sentence part within the sentence is. For example, if you use and, but, however, those kind of words, that shows a relationship between what comes before and what comes afterwards. If you have a good grasp of all that sort of stuff, and you know how to lead your reader from the beginning to the sentence to the end of the sentence in such a way that it is still easy to process, it's still logical enough, what belongs together goes together, you know, then a long sentence becomes easier to read than a bunch of short sentences that do not have this strategic planning, if you will.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
So the most important thing is make sure that everything is well constructed and there is no clutter. That is another thing. By cluttery phrases, so like in terms of, for example, you know, this and this and this in terms of blah, 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 blah. You know, people say that all the time, especially in Great Britain and so. But that's a clutter word. It does not mean anything, you know. Then there are many of those. Where you're using also as a preposition or so, prepositions that contain 4 words, whereas you have a preposition that means the exact same thing as one word, you know. for the advancement of, for example.
Yeah,
that could be just for,
yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I do think that's probably a good key area where I need to learn how to cut that out. And by guessing, once you become alerted to it, when you do your self-editing, you can start to take the red pen to all of that stuff.
Yeah, and I would say to practice that, it is very useful to self-edit everything you write. Not per se when you're drafting. When you're drafting, you just want to get your idea out, because otherwise you get distracted by the technicalities of the writing. But even if you write an email, it takes a while to self-edit that email, and you don't always feel like it. And maybe sometimes you just don't have time for that. But if you self-edit all of your writing, as people used to do, by the way, then you get really a good antenna for where your weaknesses are and where you could improve. Like I've heard this book, the Letters of C.S. Lewis. These guys spend a lot of time on communication. Why? Because they wanted to be certain that they were not misunderstood. And the thing is, a letter is something that lasts. When you write a letter, who knows who's going to have it in his hands 100 years from now? An email that will be forgotten, and so it especially if you write a lot of emails, then who's going to read that still? Who cares? So email writing has become rather thinking aloud than actually writing.
Sure, yeah.
And it is a good idea to try to take some of that back, go a bit back to this idea of, okay, I'm writing an email. This means this is a letter. I need to be clear. This needs to be understandable. So practice to be a bit more strategic with whatever you write.
Yeah, it's hilarious because just this week I totally confused my colleague in France with a not carefully worded email. And he literally came to the opposite conclusion of what I was trying to say. But reading back, that was definitely, his English isn't that good, but also it was definitely down to how I wrote it. So it's funny. It just got flagged up to me yesterday, in fact.
Yeah, and it happens to everybody. It happens to professional writers as well. That answers another question. You asked where is the editor in this process? You asked that somewhere.
Well, yeah, I've because that's completely unknown to me. So
okay. Well, this is one of the reasons why also professionals wouldn't want to publish without, especially professionals don't want to publish without an editor, because they know where things can go wrong. The thing is, already exactly what you're going to say. So there are no missing components in your head. Of the subject that you're talking about. Yeah. I'm not talking about components inside of your head. I hope that there is nothing missing.
It's true, yeah.
But exactly all of the components. Exactly how every idea connects with every other idea. But your reader has no idea. So it happens very often that a writer does not give enough information to make a reader understand properly what you mean. And editors are trained in seeing those things. Because it could also be that your friends and family will read the very same sentence and understand it immediately because they know you or they heard you speak about it before. And editors provides a fresh set of eyes, first of all, and they are also trained in seeing ambiguities and so. Because these things also often have to do with ambiguity. You can read the sentence in two different ways, or a word does not have. A word can also have different meanings, and sometimes the context is not clear enough to show which of the meanings you mean. It's actually then often better to use a word that's a bit more precise. So over time, most words gain more and more meanings because people are misusing the word and etc.
Yeah.
So missing information and ambiguity, that's what editors look for, but also faulty grammatical structures that many, even people who are good in language, don't even see. The most common example is dangling modifiers, for example. You see dangling modifiers everywhere. And
remind me what that means.
And that is when an introductory modifier just like a participle phrase, like running to the shop. That is a participle phrase, a participial phrase. Wait a second, I'm confused with the pronunciation now for a moment. And you can only use something like that if the first word of the main clause is also the subject of that participial phrase. Okay, so running to the shop, the owner was waiting for me, for example. Doesn't make any kind of sense, but there is a dangling modifier because the owner of the shop was not the one running. You see, or
Okay. Yeah.
well, what you should say is running to the shop. I saw the shop owner waiting for me already, or something like that. Because the subject of the main clause has to be also the subject of the participle.
Right. Yeah.
Otherwise, you have a dangling modifier, and that brings very funny situations sometimes. I cannot come up with a good example now. Should actually have a sort of a list here.
Yeah. Well, what I can do, because you are explaining it, but I can just go online and find out a bit more. Because
and another thing, see how things connected is a very famous example actually. Like this morning, I shot an elephant in my pajamas, and then you should assume that you, the hunter, are wearing the pajama, but actually the joke continues. How he got into my pajamas, I don't know. And so the context already tells you what you mean, but what the sentence actually says, it's ambiguous, So and that illustrates the point that unless the reader already has some hunch about what you're going to say, these kind of constructions can be, if they are ambiguous, they can really confuse your reader. So those are things that the editor looks at. And most of the time, friends and family, even if they have a degree in English, sometimes they're just not trained to see these things,
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay, that was the first part of the conversation I had with this student. I hope it has been helpful to you. And if you want to know more about my services, about my coaching, or subscribe to my mailing list, go to yourbeststory.net. Yourbeststory.net. I'll see you next week. God bless you. Bye bye.